When armed men kicked through the diner door dragging a dying stranger, Claire Monroe's hands were shaking over coffee cups, not scalpels. The man bleeding across her floor wasn't supposed to survive the night. Neither was she. Victor DeLuca, the most dangerous crime lord in New York, had minutes left to live, and Claire had a choice. Let him die and face his men's wrath, or use the medical training she'd abandoned years ago to save a killer. One desperate act, two shattered lives, a bond that would ignite obsessions, trigger wars, and rewrite both their destinies forever. Before we begin this story, I'd love to know how far my tales travel. Drop a comment with your city below, and if you're ready for a story about danger, obsession, and impossible choices, hit that like button. Now, let's dive in. Chime. The rain hit New York like bullets that November night, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon and washing the blood from the sidewalks before anyone could ask whose it was. Claire Monroe watched it stream down the diner windows, each drop catching the red glow of the corner bodega sign, and she thought about endings, about how some nights felt like the universe was trying to tell you something, whispering in the language of storm drains and distant sirens that your life was about to split clean in two. She was 28 years old and waiting tables at the Moonlight Diner on the corner of Amsterdam and 168th, serving coffee to insomniacs and scrambled eggs to cab drivers who'd given up on going home. The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song. The cook had left at 11. The last customer had paid his check at 11:47. Now it was 12:23 a.m., and Claire was alone with the coffee pot and the kind of silence that made you think too much. Her reflection stared back from the darkened windows, brown hair pulled into a ponytail, tired green eyes, the same stained apron she'd been wearing since her shift started 8 hours ago. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd made all the wrong choices and was still paying for them, one $6 tip at a time. The medical textbooks were still in a box under her bed. She hadn't opened them in 3 years, not since she'd walked away from her surgical residency at Mount Sinai with 18 months left and a mountain of student debt that would follow her to the grave. Her attending physician had been very clear about her prospects. You walk away from this, Monroe, and you'll never practice medicine in this city again. Maybe not anywhere. She'd walked anyway. Some mistakes you made with your eyes wide open. Claire was refilling the sugar dispensers when the black SUV pulled up outside. She noticed it because nothing good ever arrived in a vehicle like that after midnight. The windows were tinted dark enough to be illegal, and it sat there idling in the rain, engine running, wipers cutting precise arcs across the windshield. Her hand tightened around the sugar container. The diner's location wasn't accidental. This neighborhood saw its share of trouble. Mostly she kept her head down and served whoever walked through the door without asking questions. The trick to surviving in this part of the city was knowing when to look and when to forget you'd seen anything at all. The SUV's passenger door opened first. A man stepped out, and even through the rain-streaked window, Claire could tell he was someone's muscle. Expensive suit, wrong build for a businessman. He scanned the street with the practiced efficiency of someone trained to spot threats, then opened the rear door. What happened next would replay in Claire's mind for years, in perfect slow-motion detail. 2 more men emerged from the vehicle, supporting a third between them. The third man wasn't walking so much as being dragged, his expensive shoes scraping across the wet pavement, his head lolling forward. Even from inside the diner, Claire could see the dark stain spreading across his white shirt, visible beneath his open coat. Blood. A lot of it. "No," she whispered to the empty diner. "Don't bring him here. Please don't bring him here." They brought him anyway. The door crashed open with enough force to crack the safety glass. The bell that normally chimed to announce customers made a broken, discordant sound. Suddenly, the diner was full of men and rain and the copper smell of blood, and Claire's carefully constructed world of coffee and silence shattered like the window she'd been watching. "Lock the door," the first man ordered. He had dark eyes and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, and his voice carried the kind of authority that expected immediate obedience. One of the others was already turning the deadbolt, flipping the sign to closed. They laid the bleeding man across the largest booth, and Claire got her first real look at him. Mid-30s, she guessed, dark hair plastered to his forehead with rain and sweat, strong features contorted with pain. His shirt was soaked through with blood, and more of it was pooling on the vinyl seat beneath him, dripping onto the checkered floor she'd mopped 2 hours ago. You. The scarred man pointed at Claire. You're going to help him. Her throat had gone completely dry. I'm a waitress. You need to call 911. He needs... No hospitals. The man's voice was flat. No police. You're going to help him here, or you're going to watch him die. Choose fast. Claire's training kicked in despite her terror, the same instincts she'd spent 3 years trying to bury. Her eyes went to the wounded man's chest, calculating blood loss, respiratory rate, signs of shock. The bullet wound was high on the right side of his chest, and from the bubbling quality of the blood, she knew immediately what she was looking at: a sucking chest wound. The bullet had penetrated the lung. He's drowning in his own blood, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Even if I wanted to help, I don't have equipment, no supplies, nothing sterile. I can't, then, improvise. The scarred man pulled a gun from his jacket and set it on the counter with deliberate care, not pointing it at her, just making sure she knew it was there. Victor DeLuca doesn't die in a fucking diner because a waitress is too scared to try. The name hit her like cold water. Victor DeLuca. She'd heard it before, whispered in the same tones people used for natural disasters and terminal diagnoses. The DeLuca family controlled half the criminal operations in New York, and Victor DeLuca was its violent, brilliant, ruthless heir, the kind of man who appeared in newspaper headlines when bodies turned up in the East River or rival operations vanished overnight. And he was dying on her booth, bleeding out while his men watched her with eyes that promised she'd join him if she failed. Claire's hands were shaking as she moved closer. Up close, she could see Victor's face was gray, his lips tinged blue. His breathing was rapid and shallow, each inhale making a wet, rattling sound that meant his lung was filling with blood. He had minutes, maybe. Definitely not long enough to argue. "What's your name?" she asked the scarred man. "Marco." "Marco, I need supplies. There's a pharmacy 2 blocks from here, still open. I need..." She rattled off a list, her medical training flooding back despite her terror. Chest tubes she wouldn't have, but there were alternatives. Improvisation. The kind of desperate field medicine she'd only read about in trauma textbooks. "And I need vodka, the strongest you can find. Multiple bottles." Marco dispatched one of his men with a gesture. The guy was out the door and gone in seconds. Claire turned back to Victor. His eyes were closed now, his breathing getting worse. She'd spent 18 months in surgical residency, most of it in the ER, and she'd learned to read the signs. He was circling the drain, shutting down system by system. "Can you hear me?" she asked, leaning close. His eyes opened. They were dark brown, almost black, and even through the pain and the blood loss, they were startlingly aware. Intelligent. He studied her face with an intensity that should have been impossible for someone dying. "What's your name?" His voice was barely a whisper, each word clearly costing him. "Claire. Claire." He repeated it like he was memorizing it. "You're going to save me." It wasn't a question. Despite everything, the bullet in his chest, the blood soaking through his clothes, the fact that he was minutes from death, Victor DeLuca stated it as simple fact, as if his will alone could rewrite biology. "I'm going to try," she said, "but I need you to stay conscious. Can you do that?" His lips curved in something that might have been a smile. Harder to die than to stay awake. The other man returned with supplies in a grocery bag, dumping everything on the counter. Claire moved fast, her training overriding her fear. She grabbed the vodka first, dousing her hands, then started laying out what she'd need. Plastic tubing, duct tape, a box cutter from under the register. Absolutely none of this was sterile, and everything about what she was about to do violated every principle of modern medicine. But modern medicine required hospitals and operating rooms and things these men clearly couldn't risk. Marco watched her with those dark, measuring eyes. "You done this before?" "Read about it." Claire's hands moved with precision, tearing open packages. "Never actually performed the procedure. First time for everything." There was no comfort in his voice, just cold pragmatism. Claire positioned herself next to Victor. His shirt was ruined anyway, so she grabbed the fabric and ripped it open, exposing his chest. The bullet wound was exactly where she'd thought, just below the collarbone on the right side. Blood bubbled with each shallow breath. "This is going to hurt," she told him. "I don't have anything for the pain." Victor's eyes met hers. "Do it." She cleaned the area as best she could with vodka-soaked gauze, then made a small incision between his ribs with the box cutter. Victor's jaw clenched, tendons standing out in his neck, but he didn't make a sound. Claire had seen grown men scream from paper cuts, but this man was taking field surgery without anesthetic in complete silence. Her fingers found the space between his ribs, and she guided the plastic tubing into his chest cavity. The moment it penetrated the pleural space, blood began flowing out through the tube, dark, oxygen-poor blood that had been compressing his lung. She taped the tube in place, then created an improvised one-way valve using a condom from the first aid kit and more duct tape. It was crude, unsophisticated, and would make any real surgeon weep. But as she worked, she could see Victor's breathing starting to ease. The tube was draining the blood from his chest cavity, allowing his lung to reinflate. "It's working," Marco said, surprise evident in his voice. Claire wasn't ready to celebrate. The tube would buy time, but Victor had lost a massive amount of blood. He needed surgery, antibiotics, a transfusion. What he had was a waitress with shaking hands and a diner full of criminal enforcers. She packed the bullet wound itself with gauze soaked in vodka, primitive but better than nothing, and taped it down. Then she elevated his legs using booth cushions, trying to keep blood flowing to his vital organs. "He needs a hospital," she said again, even though she knew it was pointless. "No hospitals." Marco's tone left no room for argument. "We have a doctor, private. He'll be here in 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Victor needed to survive 20 more minutes. Claire checked his pulse. It was rapid and thready, but it was there. His color was marginally better, the blue tinge fading from his lips. The chest tube continued to drain blood into an improvised collection system she'd rigged from plastic containers. "Stay with me," she murmured, keeping her fingers on his pulse point. It was the same thing she used to say to patients in the ER when she'd still had the right to call herself a doctor. "Just stay with me." Victor's eyes opened again. Despite everything, despite the bullet and the blood loss and the makeshift surgery, his gaze was clear and focused entirely on her. "Thank you," he whispered. 2 words. Simple. But the intensity behind them made something twist in Claire's chest. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "You're not out of danger." "Already knew." "That." His hand moved, fingers brushing against hers. His skin was cold, clammy. "Different danger. Now." She didn't understand what he meant, and she didn't have time to ask. The next 15 minutes were spent monitoring his vitals with nothing but her fingers and her training, checking the chest tube, making sure he didn't crash. Marco and his men stood guard, watching both the street and Claire with equal vigilance. The private doctor arrived in a sedan carrying a proper medical bag. He was older, 60s maybe, with the steady hands of someone who'd done this kind of work before. He took one look at Claire's improvised chest tube and raised his eyebrows. "Where did you train?" "Mount Sinai. Surgical residency. I left before finishing." He nodded slowly, examining her work. "This is excellent field medicine. You saved his life." The words should have felt like a victory. Instead, they felt like a noose tightening. The doctor set up a proper IV, started fluids and antibiotics, stabilized Victor for transport. He worked quickly and efficiently, asking Claire questions about the timeline, the patient's responses, the amount of blood loss. She answered on autopilot, her mind still trying to process what had just happened. "We're moving him," Marco announced. "Thank you for your help." Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched as they carefully transferred Victor to a stretcher, the doctor monitoring him every step. Victor's eyes were closed now, the immediate crisis past, sedation taking hold. At the door, Marco paused. He pulled out a thick envelope and set it on the counter. "For your trouble," he said, "and for your silence." Claire stared at the envelope. She didn't need to open it to know there was more money inside than she made in 6 months of waiting tables. "I don't want—" "It's not a request." Marco's voice was gentle, but firm. "You helped him. That means you're protected now. But it also means you keep this night to yourself. Understand?" She understood. She'd just saved the life of one of the most dangerous men in New York, and whether she wanted it or not, that created a connection, an obligation, a debt that ran both ways. They left, and suddenly the diner was empty again. Just Claire and the blood on the floor and the envelope full of money. She should have called the police, should have reported the whole thing. But as she stood there in the fluorescent light, listening to the rain, Claire knew she wouldn't. Partly because she was terrified of what Marco's people would do, but mostly because of the way Victor had looked at her in those final moments before the sedation took him under, like she was something precious he'd found in the darkness. It took her 2 hours to clean up the blood. She used bleach and hot water, scrubbing the vinyl booth until no trace remained. She threw away the box cutter, the bloody gauze, everything contaminated. The money she tucked into her apron pocket, not ready to think about what accepting it meant. By the time she locked up at 4 a.m., the rain had stopped. The streets were washed clean, and the sky was starting to lighten at the edges. Claire walked to the subway station on legs that felt like water, rode the train to her tiny apartment in the Bronx, and sat on her bed without turning on the lights. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. She'd saved a man's life tonight, used skills she'd thought she'd abandoned forever. For those frantic minutes, she'd been Dr. Monroe again instead of just Claire the waitress. It had felt like coming home to a house she'd thought was burned to the ground. But she'd also just entangled herself with the DeLuca crime family in a way that couldn't be undone. Victor DeLuca knew her name, knew her face, knew she'd held his life in her hands. Claire pulled out the envelope and counted the money. $20,000. More than enough to make a fresh start somewhere else. Enough to disappear if she was smart about it. She could be on a bus to anywhere by morning, could leave New York and Victor DeLuca and the memory of blood on diner floors behind. Instead, she put the money in her drawer and lay down on her bed, still wearing her blood-stained clothes. Because deep down, beneath the fear and the shock, she knew the truth. She wasn't going anywhere. Some part of her wanted to know what happened next, wanted to see if Victor DeLuca survived, wanted to understand why 2 words of thanks from a dying criminal had felt more meaningful than anything she'd experienced in years. Outside her window, the city was waking up. Somewhere out there, Victor DeLuca was fighting for his life in a private facility with real doctors and proper equipment. And somewhere in that same city, decisions were being made about Claire Monroe that she wouldn't learn about until it was far too late to run. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but all she could see was Victor's dark gaze, intense and aware, even in the shadow of death. All she could hear was his whispered voice. Different danger now. Claire had spent 3 years running from her past, from the doctor she'd failed to become, and the future she'd thrown away. Tonight, she'd run straight into something far more dangerous than failure. She'd run into fate. And fate, she was about to learn, didn't let go once it had you in its teeth. The next 3 days passed in a strange, dreamlike haze. Claire went to work, served coffee and eggs, smiled at customers, and pretended everything was normal. But she jumped every time the door opened, scanned every black SUV that passed, waited for Marco and his men to return, though she didn't know if she was hoping for it or dreading it. The money sat in her drawer untouched. She couldn't bring herself to spend it. It felt like evidence, like a contract she'd signed in blood. On the 4th day, the diner's owner called her into his office. Tony Rizzo was a second-generation Italian-American who'd run the Moonlight for 30 years and asked exactly 0 questions about his late-night clientele. "Got a call this morning?" he said, not meeting her eyes. "From a lawyer. Says a client wants to buy the diner. Offered 3 times what it's worth." Claire's stomach dropped. "Tony, I'm selling," he continued, "and the new owner wants to keep you on. Gave specific instructions. Same shifts, double your current wage." "Who's the new owner?" Tony finally looked at her, and there was something like pity in his expression. "Didn't ask. Advice? Don't you ask either." She understood. Victor DeLuca, or someone working for him, now owned the diner where she worked, owned her workplace, had just made it impossible for her to leave without his permission. The message was clear. "You're under my protection. You're also under my control." Claire should have been furious, should have quit on the spot. Instead, she just felt a strange, twisted sense of inevitability, like she'd known from the moment Victor's blood had touched her hands that this was how it would go. That night, she worked her shift in the newly acquired diner, serving the usual customers, and tried not to think about the fact that she was now, technically, employed by a crime lord. The pay increase was substantial enough that she could start paying down her student loans, could maybe, eventually, afford to think about her future again, if she survived long enough to have one. The clock struck midnight. Claire was wiping down the counter when the door opened and Marco walked in, alone this time. He sat at the counter and waited for her to pour him coffee. She suspected he had no intention of drinking. "He wants to see you," Marco said without preamble. Claire's hands tightened on the coffee pot. "Is he alive, recovering, asking for you every day since he woke up?" Marco studied her face. "You saved his life. He doesn't forget things like that." "I was just doing what anyone would do." "No." Marco's voice was flat. "Most people would have let him bleed out. Would have called the cops the second we left. You didn't. That means something to him." "What does he want?" "To thank you properly. To talk." Marco slid a card across the counter. An address in Manhattan. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Car will pick you up." "And if I say no?" Marco's expression didn't change. "Do you really think that's an option?" No, she didn't. Claire took the card, feeling the weight of inevitability settle heavier on her shoulders. "He's not going to hurt you," Marco added, something almost like reassurance in his voice. "Victor DeLuca doesn't hurt people who save his life, but he does expect gratitude to be acknowledged. On both sides." After Marco left, Claire stared at the address on the card, an upscale building in Midtown, the kind of place she'd never been inside, where doormen wore uniforms and the lobby probably had marble floors. She should throw the card away, should ignore the summons and hope they'd just let her disappear into obscurity. But Claire had learned something about herself that night in the blood-soaked diner. She wasn't good at walking away. Not from medical school, not from impossible situations, and apparently not from dangerous men who looked at her like she'd hung the stars. Tomorrow, at 8 p.m., she'd find out exactly what Victor DeLuca wanted from the woman who'd saved his life, and whether she was brave enough or foolish enough to survive whatever came next. The black Mercedes arrived at exactly 7:55 p.m., idling outside Claire's apartment building like a sleek predator. She watched it from her third-floor window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Dark jeans, a simple white blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders because she'd changed her mind about the ponytail 3 times. She looked like she was going to a job interview, which maybe she was. An interview for a position she hadn't applied for and wasn't sure she wanted. The driver didn't honk, didn't call, just waited with the patience of someone paid to be invisible. Claire grabbed her jacket and headed downstairs before she could talk herself out of it. The November air bit through her clothes, carrying the smell of street vendors and exhaust. The driver opened the rear door without a word, and she slid into leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent. They drove through Manhattan in silence, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Claire watched the neighborhoods change from her shabby corner of the Bronx to the polished glass towers of Midtown. The building they stopped in front of was all modern architecture and understated wealth, the kind of place where even the doorman's uniform looked expensive. Marco met her in the lobby. He looked different in the warm lighting, less like hired muscle, more like executive security. His suit was tailored, his expression professionally neutral. "Good evening, Miss Monroe," he said, like this was a normal social call. "Victor's expecting you." The elevator rose so smoothly she barely felt the movement. Marco pressed the button for the penthouse, and Claire's stomach dropped for reasons that had nothing to do with acceleration. "How is he?" she asked, filling the silence. "Recovering well. You did remarkable work under impossible circumstances." Marco glanced at her. "The doctor said another 5 minutes and Victor would have drowned in his own blood. You gave him those 5 minutes." The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, and Claire stepped into a world she'd only seen in magazines. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan, the city spread out like scattered diamonds on black velvet. The furniture was minimal and expensive, all clean lines and understated elegance. Original artwork hung on the walls. She recognized a Rothko, which meant she was standing in a room worth more than she'd earn in 10 lifetimes. "He's on the terrace," Marco said, gesturing toward the glass doors. Claire walked through the living room on legs that felt steadier than they should. Through the windows, she could see a figure standing at the railing, his back to her. Even in silhouette, she recognized Victor DeLuca. She slid open the door, and the November wind hit her immediately, carrying the distant sound of traffic and the city's eternal hum. Victor turned, and for a moment they just looked at each other. He was thinner than she remembered, his face still too pale, but he was standing, breathing, alive. He wore dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and she could see the edge of bandages at his collar. His dark eyes were exactly as she remembered, intelligent, intense, missing nothing. Claire. Her name and his voice sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice? A slight smile touched his lips. Always. Though I hoped you'd be curious enough to accept the invitation. Is that what this is? An invitation? She stepped onto the terrace, the wind whipping her hair. Because buying my workplace felt more like a leash. Protection, Victor corrected. The diner is now under DeLuca oversight. That means no one touches it, no one bothers you, no one asks questions about what happened that night. He paused. It also means you get paid what you're actually worth instead of poverty wages. I didn't ask for your protection. No. You asked for medical supplies and vodka, then proceeded to perform emergency thoracic surgery with a box cutter and plastic tubing. Victor moved closer, and she could see the careful way he held himself, the slight stiffness that spoke of healing wounds. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Someone who acts instead of freezing, someone with the skill and the courage to try the impossible. I had medical training, that's all. You walked away from it. It wasn't a question. Mount Sinai Surgical Residency, 18 months left. You quit and disappeared into minimum wage obscurity. Why? Claire's jaw tightened. You had me investigated. I make it a point to know who saves my life, and who I owe. He was close enough now that she could see the scar tissue at his collar, the shadow of exhaustion under his eyes. You could have let me die. Should have, probably. I'm not a good man, Claire. I'm sure you figured that out by now. You're a criminal. Yes. No denial, no deflection, just simple honesty. I run operations your police commissioner pretends don't exist. I make decisions that keep some very dangerous people in line, and sometimes those decisions require violence. 4 nights ago, someone decided I was a problem that needed eliminating. They were incorrect, thanks to you. Who shot you? That's been handled. The finality in his tone made it clear what handled meant. You don't need to worry about it. Claire wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. What do you want from me, Victor? He studied her for a long moment. I want to know why you saved me. Not the medical instinct answer, the real reason. You knew who I was. Marco told you my name. You knew what saving me meant, but you did it anyway. The question caught her off guard with its directness. Claire turned to look out at the city, gathering her thoughts. The light stretched to every horizon, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to map. Someone was dying, she said finally. I had the knowledge to help. Everything else was just noise. Just noise. Victor moved to stand beside her at the railing. Most people hear that noise pretty loud when the dying man is Victor DeLuca. Maybe I'm not most people. No. His voice was soft. You're definitely not. They stood in silence for a moment, the wind carrying the scent of his cologne, something expensive and subtle. Claire was acutely aware of his proximity, the way he angled his body slightly toward her like a compass finding north. I owe you my life, Victor said. That's not a debt I take lightly. Name your price. Medical school paid off? New career set up anywhere you want? Money, security, whatever you need. It's yours. I don't want your money. The words came out sharper than she intended. You took the $20,000. I haven't spent it. Why not? Claire turned to face him. Because I don't know what it means. Because taking money from you feels like signing a contract I haven't read. Victor's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. Smart. Most people would have spent it and convinced themselves it was just good fortune. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to her. My private number. You call it day or night, and I answer. Any problem you have, any danger, anything at all, I handle it. That's what the money means. That's the contract. She took the card slowly, feeling the weight of what he was offering. Why would you do that? Because you saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. Because you're brilliant and wasted serving coffee to drunks. Because he stopped, something flickering across his face. Bro, because when I was bleeding out on that booth dying, the last thing I saw before the doctor sedated me was your face. You looked at me like I was worth saving, not Victor DeLuca, crime lord, just a man who needed help. No one's looked at me like that in a very long time. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. This close, she could see the exhaustion in his features, the pallor that came from blood loss and trauma. He should have been in bed, recovering. Instead, he was standing on a terrace in the cold because she'd agreed to come. You should sit down, she said quietly. You're still healing. A surprised laugh escaped him. Still playing doctor? Old habits. But she was genuinely worried. How much pain are you in? Manageable, which meant a lot. The doctor says I'll make a full recovery, thanks to your improvised chest tube buying me time. It was crude medicine. I'm surprised it worked. It worked because you knew what you were doing. Because when everyone else was panicking, you stayed calm and made impossible decisions. Victor's gaze held hers. That's power, Claire. Real power. Not the kind that comes from money or fear. The kind that comes from competence under pressure. Is this a job offer? Because I don't want to work for you. No, this is me trying to figure out what to do with someone who shouldn't exist. You're a complication, Claire Monroe. A civilian who knows too much, who I can't threaten because she saved my life, who won't take money, who walked away from a brilliant career for reasons you won't explain. He tilted his head slightly. You're making this very difficult. Making what difficult? Categorizing you. Everyone in my world fits into clear boxes. Employees, enemies, assets, liabilities. You don't fit anywhere. Maybe I don't need to fit. Maybe not. Victor was quiet for a moment. But you're in my world now, whether you want to be or not. That night made you visible to people who notice these things. The fact that I'm alive when I should be dead raises questions. Eventually, someone will connect those dots back to you. Fear spiked through her. You said I was protected. You are. Under my protection, which is substantial. But it also means you're marked as mine. People will see the diner acquisition, the security presence, the obvious interest. They'll draw conclusions. His voice was matter-of-fact, delivering terrible news with calm precision. I'm sorry. I wish there was another way. But the moment you saved my life, you became part of my story, and my story is dangerous. Claire's hands tightened on the railing. So I'm trapped. You're protected, Victor corrected. There's a difference. Trapped means no choices. I'm giving you all the choices I can. You want to leave New York? I'll set you up anywhere in the country with a new identity, enough money to start over. You want to finish medical school? I know people at every major hospital in America. One call, and your residency problems disappear. He paused. Or you stay, under my protection, and live your life. I don't own you, Claire. I just make sure no one else tries to. Those aren't real choices. They're all just different versions of being in your debt. The debt is mine, not yours. I owe you my life. These are repayment options. She shook her head, frustration and fear mixing into something combustible. You don't get it. I don't want to be repaid. I don't want to be protected. I just want to go back to my normal, boring life where the biggest problem is rude customers and broken coffee makers. That life ended the moment my blood hit your floor. Victor's voice was gentle but implacable. I'm sorry, but pretending otherwise will only get you hurt. The truth of it settled over her like a weight. He was right. She'd crossed a line that night, and there was no crossing back. The question was what she did with that reality. I need time, she said, to think, to process all of this. Take what you need. The protection stands regardless of what you decide. Victor pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. Marco will drive you home. But Claire? He waited until she looked at him. If you do decide to run, tell me first. Don't just disappear. The people looking for ways to hurt me would very much like to find you without my knowledge. If you're going to vanish, let me do it properly, safely. The concern in his voice was real. Whatever else Victor DeLuca was, criminal, killer, threat, his gratitude was genuine. She'd saved his life, and he took that seriously. I'm not running, she said, surprising herself. Not yet, anyway. Good. Something that might have been relief crossed his face. Would you like to stay for dinner? I have a chef who insists I need to eat more to regain my strength, and he always makes enough for an army. The invitation was so normal, so unexpected that Claire almost laughed. You're inviting me to dinner? I'm inviting the woman who saved my life to a meal. Is that so strange? Everything about this situation is strange. Fair point. Victor smiled, and it transformed his face from intimidating to almost charming. But I promise the food is excellent, and you can ask me anything you want. Full transparency. Consider it part of your thinking process. Claire knew she should leave, should put distance between herself and this man who represented everything dangerous and unknown. But curiosity was stronger than caution, and she'd already jumped off the cliff that night in the diner. Might as well see where she'd land. Okay, she heard herself say. Dinner. They moved inside, and the warmth was a relief after the terrace wind. Marco appeared with wine, a red that probably cost more than her monthly salary, and disappeared again with the efficiency of good security. Victor moved carefully to the dining table, and Claire noticed the way he favored his right side. You're in more pain than you're admitting, she observed. Probably. He poured wine for both of them. But complaining won't change it. Stubborn, determined, there's a difference. He raised his glass. To survival, and to the remarkable woman who made it possible. They drank, and Claire had to admit the wine was extraordinary. The chef appeared with the first course, some kind of seafood preparation that looked like art on a plate, and Victor watched her reaction with amusement. Not what you're used to at the diner, he said, slightly different than scrambled eggs and hash browns. She took a bite and almost moaned. It was incredible. Okay, I take back every reservation about staying for dinner. They ate and talked, and somehow it felt almost normal. Victor asked about her medical training, and she found herself telling him about the emergency room rotations, the impossible hours, the thrill of saving lives under pressure. He listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that showed he understood the complexities of trauma medicine. So why did you quit? He asked finally, the question she'd been dreading. Claire set down her fork. There was a patient, 16 years old, car accident, massive internal injuries. I was assisting on the surgery and I made a call, a good call, the kind that should have saved his life. But my attending physician disagreed, overruled me, did it his way. She could still see the boy's face, still hear the flatline tone. The patient died. My way might not have saved him either, but his way definitely didn't. And afterward, when I tried to file a report, tried to question the decision, I was told to shut up and learn my place. So you walked away? So I walked away. Because I couldn't be in a system where ego mattered more than patient outcomes, where hierarchy meant more than being right. She met his eyes. I know how that sounds, idealistic and naive, but I couldn't stay. Couldn't watch it happen again and pretend it was okay. Victor was quiet for a moment. That's not naive. That's having principles and the courage to stand by them. Most people just learn to compromise until they can't remember what they believed in the first place. You sound like you speak from experience. I do. This life, he gestured vaguely at the penthouse, at everything it represented. It wasn't my first choice, but it was the choice that made sense when all the legitimate paths were blocked by people who cared more about their power than doing what was right. So I built my own path. It's not legal, and it's not clean, but it's mine. And how many people have died for your path? The question was blunt, maybe too blunt, but Victor didn't flinch, more than I can count. Some because they threatened what I protect. Some because mercy would have meant weakness. Some because in this world, hesitation gets you killed. He met her gaze steadily. I won't lie to you, Claire. I'm not a good man. I've done terrible things for reasons that made sense at the time. But I don't kill without cause, and I don't target innocents. There are rules, even in my world, lines I won't cross. And if someone crosses those lines, then I remind them why the lines exist. His voice was cold, and for a moment she saw the man his enemies feared. Then it passed, and he was just Victor again, pale and healing, and somehow vulnerable despite everything. I'm a monster by most people's standards. I understand if that changes how you see me. Claire considered him. The man who'd been dying on her booth, who'd whispered her name like a prayer. The crime lord who'd bought her workplace to protect her. The person sitting across from her now, offering honesty instead of pretty lies. "I think," she said slowly, "that you're more complicated than monster or saint. And I think you've built a life where those are the only two options people see." "And what do you see?" "Someone who takes debts seriously. Someone who's survived by being harder than his enemies. Someone who's—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. "Lonely?" Victor supplied. "You can say it. It's true." The admission surprised her. "I wouldn't think Victor DeLuca has any trouble finding company." "Company, no. Someone who sees past the name and the reputation and the fear?" He shook his head. "That's considerably rarer. Most people are too terrified or too greedy to be real with me. You're the first person in years to tell me I should sit down because I'm in pain. The first to argue with me instead of just agreeing to everything I say. Maybe you need people to argue with you more." "Maybe I do." His smile was genuine. "You're good at it." They finished dinner over easier conversation. Books they'd read, places they'd traveled, the strange, small details that made people human. Victor was well-read and surprisingly funny when he relaxed, and Claire found herself laughing more than she had in months. It was easy to forget in these moments exactly who she was having dinner with. Marco appeared as they finished dessert. "Sir, you have a call. It's urgent." Victor's expression shifted immediately, the pleasant dinner companion replaced by something colder and more focused. "I need to take this." "Claire, I'm sorry." "It's fine. I should probably get home anyway." She stood, and Victor rose with her, moving to grasp her hand. "Thank you for coming tonight, for giving me a chance to explain." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and the touch sent electricity up her arm. "I meant what I said. You have my number. Use it if you need anything at all." "I will. And Victor?" She squeezed his hand gently. "Take care of yourself. Actually rest and heal instead of pretending you're fine." "Yes, doctor." But there was warmth in his voice, something almost affectionate. Marco drove her home through the quiet streets, and Claire stared out at the passing city, her mind churning. She should be terrified, should be planning her escape. Instead, all she could think about was the way Victor had looked at her across the dinner table, like she was a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve. Her phone buzzed as she reached her apartment. A text from an unknown number. "Thank you for tonight. Sleep well. V." She saved the number and climbed the stairs to her apartment, feeling like she'd just stepped off a cliff and discovered she could fly. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange new rhythm. Claire worked her shifts at the diner, now under official DeLuca protection, which meant better tips and zero tolerance for problem customers. She noticed the security, never obvious, but always there. The guy reading a newspaper who never turned the page. The delivery driver who seemed to linger near the entrance. Victor's people, watching over her. She didn't hear from Victor directly, though Marco stopped by occasionally with messages. Victor was recovering well. Victor wanted to make sure she had everything she needed. Victor appreciated her discretion. It felt like being orbited by a planet with its own gravity, constant pull even from a distance. Then, on a Tuesday night 2 weeks after their dinner, everything changed. Claire was closing up the diner at midnight when she noticed the car across the street. Not one of Victor's. Wrong model, wrong positioning. 2 men inside, watching the diner with too much focus. Her instincts screamed danger. She pulled out her phone and found Victor's number, her thumb hovering over the call button. Was she overreacting, being paranoid? The car doors opened. Both men stepped out. One of them pulled a gun. Claire hit dial and dropped behind the counter as the diner's front window exploded in a shower of glass. Gunfire ripped through the space where she'd been standing, tearing through vinyl booths and shattering coffee cups. "Claire?" Victor's voice in her ear, sharp with concern. "The diner!" she gasped, crawling toward the back exit. "Men with guns! They're shooting!" More gunfire. The coffee maker exploded, raining hot liquid and grounds. Claire screamed and kept crawling, phone pressed to her ear. "Stay down." Victor's voice was deadly calm. "Help is 30 seconds away. Stay down and stay on the line with me." "Victor, I'm scared." I know, sweetheart, but you're going to be fine. Just stay low and keep moving toward the back. Can you do that?" The endearment barely registered through her terror. She could hear shouting now, the shooters entering through the broken window, heavy boots on broken glass. "Where is she?" Rough voice, unfamiliar. "Find the girl. She's here somewhere." Claire's breath came in panicked gasps. She made it to the kitchen, pressed herself against the wall behind the industrial refrigerator. Through the phone, she could hear Victor shouting orders to someone, the sound of a car engine roaring to life. "Claire, are you hidden?" "Kitchen, behind the refrigerator." "Stay exactly there. Don't move. Don't make a sound. My men are almost there." Footsteps approaching the kitchen. Claire clamped her hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing. The shooter appeared in the doorway, gun raised, scanning the space. He turned toward her hiding spot. Then the diner's back door exploded inward, and Marco appeared with 3 other men, weapons drawn. The next 10 seconds were chaos, gunfire, shouting, the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Claire squeezed her eyes shut and tried to make herself smaller. Then Marco was crouching beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Miss Monroe, you're safe. It's over." She looked past him to see both shooters on the ground, not moving. Marco's men were already securing the scene, working with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this before. "Claire?" Victor's voice urgent in her ear. "Claire, talk to me." "I'm okay." Her voice shook. "Marco's here. The men who shot at me are dead," Marco confirmed quietly. "They won't hurt you." Through the phone, she heard Victor release a breath. "I'm 5 minutes away. Stay with Marco. I'll be right there." The next few minutes blurred. Marco wrapped her in his jacket and led her outside, away from the bodies and the wreckage. Police sirens wailed in the distance, but Marco made a phone call and they faded away, diverted elsewhere. That kind of power should have terrified her. Instead, she was just grateful. Victor's Mercedes screeched to a stop at the curb, and he was out and moving before the car fully stopped. He looked pale, moving too fast for someone still recovering, but his focus was entirely on her. "Claire." He reached her and cupped her face in his hands, eyes searching hers frantically. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "No, I'm fine. I just—" Her voice broke. "They were trying to kill me." "I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He pulled her against his chest and she let herself collapse into him, shaking with delayed reaction. His arms wrapped around her, one hand in her hair, holding her like she was precious. "This is my fault. They came for you to get to me." "Who were they?" "Rivals. People who thought hurting you would hurt me." His voice was cold fury above her head. "They were right. But they won't make that mistake again." Marco approached. "Sir, we should move. Police will have questions we'd prefer not to answer." Victor nodded, keeping one arm around Claire. "Take her to the penthouse. Full security protocol. No one gets near her." "I can't just leave," Claire started. "Yes, you can." Victor's tone left no room for argument. "Your apartment isn't safe. The diner isn't safe. Until I've eliminated every threat, you stay where I can protect you properly." She should have argued, should have insisted on her independence. But men had just tried to kill her, and Victor's arms felt like the only safe place in the world. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Victor guided her to his car, his hand never leaving her back. As they drove through the night toward his penthouse, toward the protection of his world, Claire realized the truth with crystal clarity. There was no going back now. She wasn't just connected to Victor DeLuca anymore. She was his to protect, his to guard. And from the fierce, possessive way he held her hand in the darkness, she suspected that meant she was his in ways neither of them were quite ready to admit. The penthouse felt different at 2 a.m, all shadows and city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Claire sat on Victor's leather couch, wrapped in a blanket Marco had provided, still wearing her blood-stained work clothes, still shaking despite the warmth. Victor paced in front of the windows like a caged predator, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and deadly as he issued orders to people whose names Claire didn't know and probably didn't want to. "I want every single person who knew about the diner identified by morning," he said, his back to her. "Every rival family, every independent operator who might have thought this was an opportunity. And I want to know who gave the order." He paused, listening. "I don't care if it starts a war, Marco. They shot at her. In my establishment, under my protection. That requires an answer written in blood." Claire pulled the blanket tighter, the reality of what had just happened settling over her in waves. Men had tried to kill her tonight. Would have succeeded if she hadn't called Victor, if his security hadn't been close enough to respond. She kept seeing the shooter's face as he'd turned toward her hiding spot, the cold calculation in his eyes as he'd raised his gun. Victor ended the call and turned to her, his expression shifting from cold fury to something gentler. He crossed the room and crouched in front of her, his hands careful on her knees. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "I don't know." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if I hadn't called you. If Marco had been a minute later." Don't think about that." Victor's hands tightened slightly. "You called me. My men got there in time. You're safe." "For how long?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You said it yourself. People see me as your weakness now. How many more attacks before one of them succeeds?" Victor's jaw clenched. "That won't happen." "You can't promise that. You can't be everywhere. Protect against everything. This is your world, Victor. Violence and retaliation and people dying in diners. I don't know how to live in it." "You're right." He sat back on his heels, and she could see the exhaustion in his face, the strain of moving too much while still healing. "This is my world, and it's brutal and unforgiving. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but I won't lie to you. Being associated with me makes you a target. It's the price of my protection, and it's not a fair trade." "Then what do I do? I can't go back to my apartment, can't go back to work, can't live my normal life anymore." Frustration and fear bled into her voice. "You said I had choices, but I don't see any good ones." "There's one." Victor stood slowly, offering her his hand. "Come with me." She let him pull her to her feet, and he led her to the terrace. The November wind hit them immediately, but he positioned her against the railing where the building blocked most of it. The city sprawled beneath them, millions of lights in the darkness. "When I was 23, Victor said, staring out at the skyline, "my father was murdered by a rival family. They cut him down in the street like he was nothing. I inherited his empire, his enemies, and his debts all at once. I was terrified, had no idea what I was doing, just knew that showing weakness would get me killed." He paused. "So I became something else, someone harder, someone they feared more than they hated. I built walls around myself so thick that nothing could touch me." "What changed?" "You did." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "You saw me dying and didn't see Victor DeLuca, crime lord, just saw someone who needed help. You gave me that help knowing exactly what it would cost you, and you didn't hesitate. For the first time in a decade, someone looked at me and saw a person worth saving." "Victor, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I know this is terrifying. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I'm offering you something I've never offered anyone: complete honesty and real choices. You want to leave? I'll set you up with a new identity in any city you choose. Witness protection level security. You'll never hear from me again, and you'll be safe. Or..." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "You stay. You let me protect you properly, not from a distance, but up close. You become part of my world instead of hovering on the edge of it." "What does that mean? Part of your world?" "It means you stay here where I can keep you safe. It means my enemies know that touching you means going through me, and no one is that stupid twice. It means..." He hesitated, something uncertain crossing his face. "It means you and I figure out what this is between us. This thing that started when your hands kept my blood inside my body. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since that night, and tonight when Marco called to say you were being shot at, I felt terror I haven't experienced in 15 years. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. "You barely know me. I know you're brilliant and brave and far too good for my world. I know you argue with me when everyone else is too afraid. I know that when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be human instead of just a weapon people point at their problems." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing along her cheekbone. "I know this is insane and dangerous and probably the worst decision either of us could make, but I'm asking anyway. Stay with me, Claire. Let me keep you safe. Let me see where this goes." She should say no. should choose the witness protection option and disappear into a quiet life somewhere far from New York and violence and men who looked at her like she held the sun. But as she stood there with Victor's hand on her face and the city spread out beneath them, Claire realized something terrifying. She didn't want to leave, didn't want to disappear, wanted to see what happened if she was brave enough to stay. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Completely." His lips curved into a slight smile. "Is that a yes?" "I need ground rules. If I stay, we do this my way in some things." "Such as?" "I'm not some possession you get to control. I make my own decisions about my life, my choices. Your protection doesn't mean your ownership." "Agreed." "And if people are going to die because of me, I want to know. No hiding the violence and pretending it doesn't exist. If I'm in this world, I'm in it with my eyes open." Victor's expression turned serious. "Claire, you don't want to know the things I do to keep you safe." "Maybe not, but I need to anyway. I won't be sheltered and lied to for my own good. If we're doing this, we're doing it honestly." He studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing her request against his instincts to protect. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, honesty, even when it's ugly." "Then yes." The word came out steadier than she felt. "I'll stay." The relief that flooded Victor's face was profound. He pulled her against him, arms wrapping around her with a desperation that spoke of how close he'd come to losing her tonight. Claire let herself lean into him, breathing in his scent, feeling his heartbeat against her cheek. For someone so dangerous, he held her like she was made of glass. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he murmured into her hair. "I swear it." "I know." And somehow she did. They stood like that for a long moment before Victor pulled back slightly, his hands on her shoulders. "You should rest. It's been a terrible night, and you're running on adrenaline. There's a guest room set up, everything you need." Claire nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Victor guided her inside and down a hallway to a bedroom that was bigger than her entire apartment. The bed looked impossibly soft, and there were clothes laid out, simple things in her size that Marco must have arranged. "How did you know my size?" she asked. "I pay attention." Victor's smile was slight. "Sleep as long as you need. We'll talk more in the morning about security arrangements and what happens next." He turned to leave, but Claire caught his hand. "Victor, thank you for coming tonight, for keeping me safe." His fingers laced through hers, and he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent heat flooding through her. "Always, for as long as you'll let me." Then he was gone, and Claire was alone with the enormity of what she'd just agreed to. She showered off the night's terror, changed into the soft pajamas someone had provided, and climbed into bed. Sleep should have been impossible, but exhaustion dragged her under almost immediately. She woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then the previous night came flooding back. The shooting. Victor's offer. Her decision to stay. Claire found clothes in the closet, jeans and a sweater that fit perfectly, and made her way to the kitchen. Victor was there, dressed in dark slacks and a button-down, looking far more rested than he had any right to. He was reading something on his tablet, but looked up when she entered. "Good morning," he said, and there was a warmth in his voice that made something flutter in her chest. "Coffee?" "Please." She accepted the cup he poured, noting the way he prepared it exactly how she liked it. "Did you sleep at all?" "A few hours. I had calls to make, arrangements to finalize." He set down his tablet. "We need to discuss security protocols. Marco will be your primary protection when you leave the penthouse, which should be minimal for the next few weeks until we've neutralized the threat." "Neutralized?" Claire sipped her coffee. "That's a nice word for killing people." "You wanted honesty." Victor's tone was matter-of-fact. "Yes. The men who ordered the attack on you will die. So will anyone who helped them. That's how this world works. Violence answered with greater violence until everyone remembers why attacking what's mine is a fatal mistake." The possessiveness in his voice should have bothered her. Instead, it sent an unexpected thrill down her spine. "What's mine?" "You are." He met her gaze directly. "If you stay under my protection, if you choose this, then yes, you're mine. Not as property, as someone I claim responsibility for, someone I defend with everything I have. And what am I supposed to do while you're defending me? Sit here and wait? For now, yes. I know you hate it. But until the threat is eliminated, you stay here where it's secure. After that, he paused. What do you want, Claire? If you could have anything, do anything, what would it be? The question caught her off guard. I don't know. I haven't thought about wanting things in a long time. Think about it now. She considered turning the possibilities over in her mind. I'd finish medical school, get my degree, my certification, actually become the doctor I was supposed to be. Then that's what you'll do. Victor said it like it was simple, already decided. I'll make calls today, Mount Sinai or any program you prefer. Full tuition paid, your record cleaned up, whatever you need to start over. You can't just make that happen with a phone call. Yes, I can. One of the benefits of my particular position, I have leverage over people who make those decisions. Your attending physician who blocked you? He has gambling debts I own. The hospital board? Several members have used my services over the years. They'll be happy to help once I explain the situation. Claire set down her coffee, unsettled by how easily he could manipulate the institutions she'd thought were untouchable. That's not earning it. That's just buying my way in. You earned it 3 years ago when you were brilliant enough to get into the program in the first place. Some vindictive attending cost you your career over a disagreement. I'm just correcting that injustice. Victor leaned forward. You saved my life with medical knowledge you thought was wasted. Let me help you use that knowledge to save others. It's not buying anything. It's removing obstacles that should never have existed. You make it sound so simple. Because it is. You're overthinking this. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I have power, Claire. Resources. Connections. Let me use them for something good instead of just protecting territory and eliminating enemies. Let me help you become who you were meant to be. The offer was tempting, dangerously so. Claire had spent 3 years mourning her lost career, convincing herself that door was closed forever. Now Victor was offering to kick it open, and all she had to do was accept help from a man who'd killed people before breakfast. I need time to think about it, she said finally. Take what you need. The offer stands. Victor's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, his expression hardening. Marco's here with an update. Do you want to hear this, or would you prefer, I want to hear it. Honesty, remember? He nodded and stood, moving to open the penthouse door. Marco entered, looking tired but focused. He nodded respectfully to Claire before turning to Victor. We identified the shooters. Kozlov family. Low-level muscle hired through an intermediary. Marco's voice was professional. The intermediary is being questioned now. He'll give us who ordered it. How long until he talks? He's already talking. Says it was Anton Kozlov himself who ordered the hit. Wanted to prove the DeLuca protection wasn't as strong as advertised. Victor's face could have been carved from stone. Where's Anton now? His club in Brighton Beach. He knows we're coming. Has security doubled. Good. Let him see it coming. Victor's voice was cold. I want him alive, Marco. I want him to understand exactly what happens when someone shoots at what's mine. Then I want him dead in a way that makes a statement. Claire's stomach twisted, but she kept her face neutral. This was the reality she'd asked to see. The violence that protected her, delivered with calm precision. Marco glanced at her, then back to Victor. Sir, perhaps we should discuss details privately. No, Claire stays. Victor moved to stand beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. She wanted honesty about how this world works. She gets it. Marco's expression suggested he thought this was a terrible idea, but he nodded. The interrogator is being thorough. We'll have confirmation of everyone involved by tonight. Do you want the Kozlov family eliminated completely, or just Anton and his immediate circle? Just Anton and anyone who knew about the order. The rest of the family gets a choice, pledge loyalty or leave the city. I'm not interested in genocide, just consequences. Understood. What about the intermediary? Useful information earns mercy. If he's told us everything, let him disappear. Give him enough money to start over somewhere far from New York. Marco made notes on his phone. In Miss Monroe's apartment, we swept it this morning. No evidence of surveillance or threats, but it's compromised by location. Empty it out. Anything she wants, bring it here. The rest gets donated. Victor glanced down at Claire. Unless you want to keep the apartment? She shook her head. That life already felt like it belonged to someone else. No, I don't need it. Then it's handled. Victor squeezed her shoulder gently. Anything else, Marco? Security protocols are in place. The penthouse is locked down tight. Anywhere Miss Monroe goes, she'll have minimum 3-person protection detail until the situation is resolved. Marco looked at Claire directly. I understand this is restrictive, Miss Monroe, but it's necessary. These people made their move and failed. They won't get a second chance. I understand, Claire said quietly. Thank you for last night, for getting there so fast. Something that might have been respect flickered across Marco's stern features. You're under DeLuca protection now. That's not just words. Anyone who threatens you threatens all of us. After Marco left, Claire found herself alone with Victor again. The magnitude of what she'd stepped into was becoming clearer by the moment. Not just Victor's protection, but his entire organization rallying to keep her safe. People she'd never met were risking their lives because she'd saved their boss. This is a lot, she said, voicing her thoughts. All these people involved because of me. Not because of you, because of what you represent. Victor guided her back to the couch, sitting beside her. You saved my life when you had no reason to. That kind of loyalty, that kind of courage, it matters in my world. My people respect you for it. They'll protect you because I've claimed you, but they'll do it gladly because you've earned it. I didn't do anything special. I just used the training I had. You keep saying that like it diminishes what you did. It doesn't. Victor turned to face her fully. Most people freeze in crisis situations. They panic, they run, they make stupid decisions. You stayed calm, made the impossible call, and executed it perfectly. That's not just training, that's character. Claire looked at him, this complicated man who could order deaths with one breath and offer her the world with the next. Why me, Victor? Really, you could have anyone. Women who are beautiful and sophisticated and who fit into your world naturally. Why fixate on a burned-out med student who served you coffee? He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. When he spoke, his voice was honest in a way that made her chest ache. Because you looked at me like I was worth saving. Because you argued with me at dinner instead of agreeing with everything I said. Because you demanded honesty, even though the truth is ugly. You're real, Claire. In a life where everyone performs for me, plays angles, wants something from me, you're just yourself. That's rarer than you know. I'm terrified, she admitted, of this world, of what staying means, of what I'm feeling for you when I barely know you. I'm terrified too. Victor's hand found hers. I haven't let anyone close in 15 years. Haven't trusted anyone with anything that matters. But you walked into my life covered in my blood, and something changed. I can't explain it better than that. They sat in silence for a moment, the enormity of the situation settling around them. Then Victor's phone buzzed again, and the moment broke. He checked it, his expression darkening. The intermediary confirmed everything. Anton Kozlov ordered the hit personally. He stood, his posture changing to something harder. I need to handle this tonight. It can't wait. Claire stood too, fear spiking through her. Handle it how? The way these things are handled, with violence and finality. He cupped her face, his touch gentle despite the coldness in his voice. Stay here. Marco's team will be outside. You'll be completely safe. And you? I'll be fine. I've done this 1,000 times. That's not reassuring. Her hands gripped his shirt. What if something goes wrong? What if you get hurt? Then you'll patch me up again. His smile was slight, trying for humor but not quite reaching his eyes. I'll be careful, Claire. I promise. She wanted to argue, to beg him not to go, to tell him that retaliation wasn't worth the risk. But she understood enough about his world to know this wasn't optional. Anton Kozlov had tried to kill her, had attacked Victor's protection, had challenged his authority. There had to be an answer, or the violence would never stop. Come back to me, she whispered. Please. Victor kissed her forehead, his lips lingering against her skin. Always. Then he was gone, taking half the security detail with him, and Claire was alone in the penthouse with her thoughts and her fear. She tried to distract herself, reading, watching television, anything to stop imagining what was happening in Brighton Beach. But every minute crawled by, and all she could see was Victor bleeding out again, dying in some club while she sat safe in his penthouse. Marco had left 2 guards outside the door and promised to keep her updated. But as midnight approached with no word, Claire's anxiety transformed into something close to panic. She paced the living room, her phone clutched in her hand, willing it to ring. At 12:47 a.m., it finally did. Marco's name on the screen. "Hello?" Her voice shook. "It's done. Victor's fine. We're coming back now." Relief flooded through her so powerfully she had to sit down. "What happened?" "Best if Victor tells you himself. We'll be there in 20 minutes. The wait was agony, but finally she heard the elevator, the sound of multiple people entering the penthouse. Claire rushed to the entryway and found Victor standing there, very much alive, though his shirt was splattered with blood that clearly wasn't his. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. Victor crossed the space in 3 strides and pulled her against him, his kiss fierce and demanding and full of violence barely contained. Claire kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his blood-stained shirt, claiming him the way he'd claimed her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "It's over," he said quietly. "Anton Kozlov is dead. His organization is scattered. No one will come for you again. You're safe." "And you?" She touched his face, checking for injuries she couldn't see. "Not a scratch. I told you, I'm very good at this." He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "But coming home to you made me realize something. I've spent 15 years not caring if I lived or died. Just going through the motions, surviving. Tonight, for the first time, I wanted to survive. Wanted to come back. Because you were here, waiting." Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. "Victor, I'm not asking for anything," he interrupted gently. "Just telling you the truth. You wanted honesty, so here it is. You've become the reason I want to keep living. And that terrifies me almost as much as it did when they shot at you." She should probably be scared by the intensity of what he was saying, by how quickly this had escalated from protection to something much deeper. But standing there with Victor's arms around her and his blood, someone else's blood, on his clothes, Claire felt something click into place. This was insane, dangerous, completely illogical. She barely knew this man, and what she did know should send her running. But somehow, impossibly, she was falling for him anyway. "I think," she said carefully, "that we're both completely crazy." "Probably." Victor smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet. Ask me again tomorrow." He laughed, the sound surprising and genuine, and pulled her close again. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other while the city glittered beyond the windows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new questions about what they were building together. But tonight, they were both alive and whole and safe in each other's arms. And for now, that was enough. The safe house Victor's men transported Claire to wasn't what she expected. Located 2 hours outside the city in upstate New York, it looked like a modest cabin from the outside. Weathered wood, a gravel driveway, surrounded by dense forest that swallowed sound. Inside was a different story. State-of-the-art security systems, reinforced walls, enough provisions to last months. A gilded cage designed to keep threats out and her safely trapped within. She'd been there for 3 days, and the isolation was driving her insane. Marco visited daily with supplies and updates he clearly wasn't authorized to share. Victor was handling the situation. Victor had eliminated 2 rival operations. Victor was making sure she'd be safe to return soon. But Victor himself never came, never called, and his absence felt like abandonment even though Claire knew it was strategic. He was drawing fire away from her, making himself the visible target while she stayed hidden. It didn't make her feel less alone. On the 4th morning, Claire was making coffee in the industrial-grade kitchen when she heard vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, moving fast. Her heart seized with panic until she recognized the sound of Victor's Mercedes leading the convoy. She was at the door before Marco could use his key, pulling it open to find Victor climbing out of his car. He looked exhausted, his face drawn with fatigue and something darker. Blood stained his shirt cuff, and there was a cut above his eyebrow that hadn't been treated. "You're hurt," she said, the words escaping before she could think. It's nothing. But he swayed slightly as he approached, and Claire saw Marco move closer, ready to catch him if needed. Inside. Now. She used her doctor voice, the one that expected obedience, and to her surprise, Victor complied. The safe house had a medical kit more comprehensive than most emergency rooms. Claire made Victor sit at the kitchen table while she gathered supplies, her hands moving with the old familiar efficiency of trauma assessment. What happened? She asked, cleaning the cut on his forehead. Found the people who ordered the hit on you. Victor's voice was flat, emotionless. Made sure they understood that was a mistake. How many? Does it matter? Claire met his eyes. How many people did you kill because of me? 7. No hesitation, no sugarcoating. The ones who gave the order, the ones who pulled triggers at the diner, and everyone in between who thought you were an acceptable target. His hand caught her wrist, stopping her ministrations. I'd kill 70 more if that's what it took to keep you safe. The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. Victor, they took you from me. His grip tightened, not painful but desperate. Dragged you out of that car at gunpoint while I was halfway across the city. Do you have any idea what those hours were like? Knowing they had you, knowing what they might do before I could get there? Claire remembered those hours differently. The terror of the abandoned warehouse, the cold concrete floor, the way her captors had discussed her fate like she was livestock. But she also remembered the moment Victor had appeared in the doorway, backlit by muzzle flash and fury, moving through armed men like they were nothing. The absolute certainty in his eyes when he'd reached her. I've got you. You're safe now. You came for me, she said softly. You saved me. I almost didn't make it in time. Another 5 minutes and... He stopped, jaw clenched. I can't do this, Claire. Can't have you out there where anyone can reach you, where my enemies can use you against me. So what are you saying? I stay hidden forever? I'm saying you stay with me. Under my protection, in my home, where I can ensure nothing touches you. Victor stood, pulling her closer. I'm saying I want you in my life in a way that makes it clear to every person in this city that harming you means death. Not just protection, partnership. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Partnership. I'm asking you to be mine, Claire. Publicly. Permanently. His hands framed her face with devastating gentleness. I know it's insane. I know we barely know each other, but I've never been more certain of anything. You're the first real thing I've had in years. The first person who sees me as human instead of monster. I'm not letting that go. This is crazy, she whispered. We met a month ago. You were bleeding to death on my floor. And you saved me. Then you challenged me, made me laugh. Argued with me like I was just a man instead of Victor DeLuca, crime lord. He smiled, but it was edged with something fierce. You think I don't know this is fast? That normal people take years to build what I'm proposing? But we're not normal people, and this isn't a normal situation. From the moment you put that chest tube in my lung, our fates got tangled together. I'm just asking us to stop fighting it. Claire's mind raced. This was insane. Agreeing to tie herself permanently to a criminal, to step fully into his dangerous world, to become his in ways that would mark her forever. Everything rational in her screamed to refuse. But rationality had stopped making sense the night she'd saved his life. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. Marriage. The word hung between them, heavy with implications. You become my wife. That gives you the full protection of the DeLuca name. No one touches you without declaring war on me. You'll have security, resources, freedom within safe parameters. And you'll have me, all of me. My loyalty, my protection, my heart such as it is. And what do you get? You. The one person in this world I trust completely. The woman who saved my life and never asked for anything in return. Someone real to come home to when the rest of my life is blood and lies. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I won't pretend this is some fairy tale. My world is dangerous. Being my wife means living with that danger. But I swear to you, Claire, I will burn this city to ashes before I let anyone hurt you again. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She absolutely believed Victor DeLuca would commit mass murder to keep her safe. I need time to think, she said. Take what you need, but think here, where you're safe. Victor pressed a kiss to her forehead, the gesture so tender it made her ache. I have meetings in the city. Marco will stay with you. Anything you want, anything at all, you tell him. He left with his security team, and Claire was alone again with her thoughts and a proposal that should have horrified her. Instead, she found herself imagining it, being Victor's wife, having the power and protection that came with his name, never having to worry about money or safety or the crushing weight of dead-end jobs and abandoned dreams. But more than that, having Victor. The man who looked at her like she was precious, who valued her mind as much as her medical skills, who'd killed 7 people to avenge her kidnapping and would have killed 70 more without hesitation. Was that love? Or obsession? Or something darker she couldn't name? Marco found her on the porch that evening, watching the sun set through the trees. He means it, you know, Marco said, settling into the chair beside her. The marriage proposal. Victor doesn't make offers like that lightly. How long have you worked for him? 15 years, since we were both stupid kids trying to survive the streets. Marco's expression was distant with memory. He saved my life back then, took a knife meant for me. We've been brothers ever since, in all the ways that matter. So you're loyal. I'm honest. And honestly, I've never seen Victor like this. He's always been controlled, strategic, thinking 10 moves ahead. But with you, he's different. More human. More vulnerable. Marco looked at her directly. That scares his enemies. A Victor DeLuca who cares about someone is a Victor DeLuca with a weakness. That's why they came after you. That's why this will keep happening unless you're under his complete protection. Or I disappear. Start over somewhere he can't find me. You think he'd let you go? Marco's smile was sad. Claire, the moment you saved his life, you became the most important person in his world. He'd find you wherever you ran. Not to hurt you. Just to know you were safe. To keep watching over you, even from a distance. That's who he is. That sounds like obsession. Maybe it is, but I've seen obsession without care. I've seen men collect people like trophies. Victor's not that. He genuinely wants you to be happy, to be safe, to choose him. He's just hoping you choose him. Claire sat with that truth as darkness fell. Victor was giving her a choice, but the options were increasingly clear. Stay in his world under his protection, or spend the rest of her life running from the enemies his mere interest had created. Or she could choose the third option, the insane one. She could choose him. 2 more days passed. Victor returned each evening, sometimes bloody, sometimes exhausted, always checking on her before he dealt with anything else. They had dinner together, talked about everything and nothing, and he never once pressured her for an answer. Just gave her time and space and the kind of patient attention that made her feel valued in ways she'd forgotten were possible. On the 7th night, after dinner, Claire found him on the porch where she'd spent so much time thinking. He stood at the railing, looking out at the forest, and she saw the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. Victor. He turned, and something in her expression made his eyes sharpen with hope and fear. I've made my decision, she said. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. I'll marry you, Claire continued, but I have conditions. Relief flooded his features. Name them. First, I want to go back to medicine, not as a surgeon. I don't think I can face that again. But maybe emergency medicine, field work, something where I can use my training. I need purpose beyond being Mrs. DeLuca. Done. I'll make calls tomorrow. Any hospital in the city will take you. Second, I want honesty. Always. I know your business requires secrets, but between us, I need truth. If you're in danger, if something threatens us, I need to know. You'll know everything that affects you. Some things I'll have to keep back for your own protection, but I'll never lie to you. You have my word. Third, she moved closer, heart pounding. If I'm doing this, if I'm stepping into your world and taking your name, then this has to be real. Not just protection, not just strategy. I need to know you want me for more than just the debt you think you owe. Victor closed the distance between them, his hands gentle on her waist. Claire, I stopped thinking about debt the moment you argued with me on my terrace, instead of agreeing to everything I said. I stopped thinking about gratitude when you told me to sit down because I was in pain. What I feel for you, He paused, searching for words. It's not something I have experience with, but it's real. It's powerful. And it terrifies me almost as much as losing you does. I'm scared too, she admitted. I'm choosing a life I don't fully understand with a man I've known for barely a month. Everything rational says this is insane. Then why say yes? Because when those men were shooting at me, when I was terrified and alone, the only thing I could think was that I wanted to hear your voice one more time. Because when you walked through that warehouse door to save me, I'd never felt safer in my life, even though you'd just killed people to reach me. Because, her voice broke. Because for the first time since I walked away from medicine, I feel like I'm choosing something instead of running away. Victor's kiss was gentle, reverent, nothing like the dangerous man his enemies feared. His lips moved against hers with a tenderness that made tears prick her eyes, and when he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this choice, he promised. I'll protect you, cherish you, give you everything I have to give. You'll never be alone again, Claire. Never be afraid. I swear it. She believed him. Against all logic and reason, she believed every word. The wedding happened fast. Victor made calls, pulled strings, and within a week they stood in front of a judge in a private ceremony with Marco as witness. Claire wore a simple white dress that probably cost more than her entire previous wardrobe, and Victor wore a suit that made him look dangerous and elegant in equal measure. When the judge pronounced them married and Victor kissed her, Claire felt the world shift. She was Claire DeLuca now, protected, powerful, permanently bound to the most dangerous man in New York, and she'd made that choice with her eyes wide open. The reception was small, just Victor's inner circle and a few carefully selected allies. Claire recognized the weight of the moment in how these hardened criminals looked at her. She wasn't just Victor's wife. She was someone they'd die to protect, because Victor would burn their world down if they failed. Later, in the penthouse that was now her home, Victor pulled her close on the terrace where they'd first really talked. Any regrets? He asked. Claire looked out at the city lights, at the kingdom she'd just become queen of through marriage to its most dangerous prince. Ask me in 50 years. I'm planning to. His arms tightened around her waist. I'm planning to give you 50 years and then 50 more. Growing old together, building something beyond the violence. Maybe even having a family, if you want that. The thought of children, of bringing innocent lives into this dangerous world, should have terrified her. Instead, she imagined a future where Victor's ruthlessness was tempered by love, where his empire became something better because she was there to challenge him. I want that, she said. All of it. The future, the family, the life we build together. Then that's what we'll have. Victor turned her in his arms, and his expression was fierce with promise. I love you, Claire. I don't know if I've said it plainly enough, but I love you with everything I am. You're my second chance, my redemption, the best thing I never knew I needed. I love you too. The words felt right, true, despite how impossible this all was. My dangerous, complicated, overwhelming husband. He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Your husband. I'm still getting used to that. They kissed under the New York stars. Two people who'd found each other in blood and chaos and built something real from the wreckage. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't clean or simple or safe, but it was theirs. In the weeks that followed, Claire settled into her new life with surprising ease. She started working at a private emergency clinic that served the city's most vulnerable populations, the same people the hospitals turned away. Victor funded it quietly, and Claire never asked where the money came from. Some questions were better left unspoken. She learned the rhythms of Victor's world, the late-night phone calls that meant trouble, the days when he came home with blood on his clothes and violence in his eyes. She learned to be as calm in the storm, the safe harbor he returned to when the darkness threatened to consume him. And Victor learned to let her in, to share the burden of his choices, to trust that she was strong enough to handle the truth of his life. They built something together in those months, not just a marriage, but a partnership. Claire's medical expertise became valuable in unexpected ways. She treated gunshot wounds for Victor's men, consulted on security protocols, even helped negotiate a truce with a rival family by pointing out the medical costs of continued warfare. She was more than Victor DeLuca's wife. She was becoming a power in her own right. 6 months after their wedding, Claire stood in the bathroom of their penthouse, staring at the positive pregnancy test in her shaking hands. They talked about children, planned for them eventually, but eventually had just become now, ready or not. She found Victor in his office, reviewing reports with Marco. Both men looked up as she entered, and whatever they saw on her face made Marco excuse himself immediately. "What's wrong?" Victor was around the desk in seconds, hands on her shoulders. "Claire, talk to me." She held up the test, unable to form words. Victor stared at it for a long moment. Then his eyes met hers, and what she saw there took her breath away. Joy, fierce and unguarded, mixed with terror and wonder. "We're having a baby," he whispered. "We're having a baby," she confirmed. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "I'm going to be a father." "You're going to be a father," Claire laughed through sudden tears. "Are you happy? Scared? Both?" "Both, definitely both." Victor pulled back to look at her, his hands cradling her face. "I'm terrified I'll fail, that I'll bring a child into this world and my enemies will—" He stopped, jaw clenched. "We'll protect them," Claire said firmly. "Together. The same way we protect each other. This baby will have both of us, and an entire organization of people who'll die before they let harm come close." "You're not scared?" "I'm terrified. But I'm also happy, excited, ready to build this family with you." She covered his hands with hers. "We're going to be okay, Victor, all three of us." That night, lying in bed with Victor's hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, Claire thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a dying man bleeding out on her floor to this moment of perfect, terrifying possibility. She'd saved Victor's life with improvised medicine and desperate courage. And in return, he'd given her a life worth living. Had taken a woman who'd given up on her dreams and shown her that new dreams were possible. Their story had started in violence and blood, but it had transformed into something else entirely. Love forged in danger, partnership built on trust, a future that neither of them could have imagined that rain-soaked November night. "I love you," Victor murmured in the darkness. "Both of you." Claire smiled, feeling the weight of that love settle over her like armor. "We love you too." Outside the penthouse windows, New York glittered with a million stories of its own. But theirs was the one that mattered. A crime lord and the doctor who saved him, building an empire not of fear, but of something far more dangerous. Hope. And as Claire drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, carrying their child and wrapped in the protection of his fierce devotion, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. One desperate act of mercy had saved a dying man. And in doing so, it had saved her too. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing at the same time. Victor became impossibly more protective, stationing additional security outside every room Claire entered, personally vetting everyone who came within 50 feet of her. It should have been suffocating, but Claire understood the terror driving it. Their child represented both their greatest joy and their most vulnerable point, and in Victor's world, vulnerability was a death sentence. She was 4 months along when the real threat emerged. Claire was at the emergency clinic, treating a teenager with a knife wound, when Marco appeared in the doorway with an expression that made her blood run cold. He waited until she'd finished stitching before approaching. "We need to leave. Now." "What's happened?" "Victor's former partner, Dominic Castellano. He's back in New York, and he's made it clear he knows about the baby." Marco's hand was already on her elbow, guiding her toward the exit. "Victor wants you at the penthouse immediately." The drive through Manhattan felt endless. Marco explained in clipped sentences. Dominic Castellano had been Victor's closest ally 5 years ago, until a disagreement over territory had turned violent. Victor had forced him out of New York, but the exile had clearly ended. And Dominic's first move back into the city was targeting Victor's pregnant wife. Victor was pacing the penthouse when they arrived, his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders in Italian. When he saw Claire, relief flooded his features, and he crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her against him. "You're okay," he murmured into her hair. "Thank God you're okay." "Victor, what's going on?" Marco said something about Dominic Castellano. "Sit down." Victor guided her to the couch, his hands trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something I should have told you months ago." Claire's stomach knotted with dread. "What?" Dominic and I built this empire together. We were brothers, partners, equals, but 5 years ago I discovered he was trafficking children. Victor's voice went cold and flat. Running underage girls through the port, selling them to the highest bidder. When I confronted him, he laughed, said it was just business, that I was getting soft. What did you do? I gave him a choice: leave New York permanently and dismantle his trafficking operation, or I'd kill him and everyone in his organization. Victor's jaw clenched. He chose exile, but he swore he'd come back someday and take everything I loved. I didn't think... He stopped, looking at her stomach. I never imagined I'd have something this precious to lose. Claire processed this, her hand instinctively covering her belly. He's coming after the baby. He's coming after both of you. My sources say he's already made contact with the Bratva, the Yakuza, every organization with a grudge against me. He's building an alliance specifically to destroy my family. Victor knelt in front of her, his hands covering hers. I won't let him touch you, either of you, but Claire, this is going to get ugly. Very ugly. Then we fight. The words came out stronger than she felt. We protect our family. You shouldn't have to fight. You should be safe, preparing for our baby, living without this constant threat. The anguish in Victor's voice broke her heart. I've brought you into a war. No. Claire tilted his face up to meet her eyes. We're in this war together. That's what partnership means. You don't carry this alone anymore, Victor. We figure it out together. He kissed her palm, and she felt the dampness of tears against her skin. I don't deserve you. Too late. You're stuck with me. She tried to smile. So what's our plan? Over the next week, the penthouse became a fortress and a war room. Victor's inner circle gathered daily, mapping Dominic's movements, identifying his allies, planning countermoves. Claire participated in every meeting, her medical knowledge proving valuable in unexpected ways. She pointed out the vulnerabilities in Dominic's supply chains, suggested non-lethal tactics that would fracture his alliances, and gradually earned the respect of men who'd initially seen her as just Victor's protected wife. But respect didn't stop the attacks. The first attempt came during a routine doctor's appointment. Claire was in the examination room when gunfire erupted in the waiting area. Victor's security team responded immediately, eliminating the threat before it reached her, but the message was clear. Nowhere was truly safe. The second attempt was more sophisticated. A car bomb outside the emergency clinic, timed to detonate when Claire arrived for her shift. Only Marco's paranoia about checking vehicles saved her life. After the third attempt, poison in the penthouse's food delivery that Victor's taster caught, Claire saw the toll it was taking on her husband. He wasn't sleeping, barely eating, and the violence in his responses was escalating. 3 rival operations had been completely destroyed in retaliation, and the body count was rising daily. She found him on the terrace late one night, staring out at the city with dead eyes. This has to stop, she said quietly. I know. I'm handling it. By killing everyone tangentially connected to Dominic? That's not handling it, Victor. That's losing control. She moved to stand beside him. You're becoming the thing you hate about this life. What choice do I have? His voice was raw. Every moment you're out there, you're at risk. Every second our baby exists, Dominic is plotting how to take that away from me. How am I supposed to stay calm when everything that matters is under threat? By being smarter than him. By remembering that you're not just a killer, you're a strategist. You forced him into exile once. You can do it again. He's different now, more desperate, more connected. He's learned from his mistakes. Victor turned to her, and she saw the fear beneath the fury. I'm terrified, Claire. Absolutely terrified that I'm going to fail you, that one of these attempts will succeed, and I'll lose you both. Claire took his hands, placing them on her swollen belly, where their baby was growing stronger every day. Then we end this, not by outkilling him, but by outthinking him. You've told me Dominic's weakness is his ego, his need to prove he's your equal, so we use that. What are you suggesting? A meeting. You, him, neutral ground. No weapons, no backup. Just 2 former partners settling accounts. She saw Victor start to object and pressed on. He won't be able to resist. His entire return is built on proving he's not afraid of you. If you offer him a face-to-face confrontation, he'll take it. And then what? I can't kill him if it's a neutral meeting. The organizations brokering the truce would see that as betrayal, and I'd have a bigger war on my hands. You don't kill him. You offer him something he wants more than revenge. Victor studied her face. You have a plan. I have the beginning of one. But I need to know something first. Claire met his eyes steadily. How much of your empire would you give up to keep us safe? Really safe. Not just protected by violence, but actually removed from this world. The question hung between them, heavy with implications. All of it, Victor said finally. Every territory, every operation, every dollar. If it meant you and our child could live without fear, I'd walk away from everything. Then that's what we offer Dominic, not exile this time, succession. You step back, hand over the legitimate parts of the empire to trusted people, and Dominic gets the crown he's always wanted. Victor DeLuca, the legendary crime lord, retires to protect his family. Dominic Castellano becomes the new king of New York. Claire watched understanding dawn in Victor's expression. His ego gets fed. His revenge becomes unnecessary because he's proven himself superior by making you back down, and we get to walk away with our lives. He'll never believe I'd actually do it. Then we make him believe it. We show weakness, vulnerability. We let him think the pregnancy has made you soft, that you're choosing family over power. Everything he's already accused you of becoming. She squeezed his hands. The truth is, you are choosing family over power. We're just making it work for us instead of against us. Victor was silent for a long moment, processing. Then he started to laugh, the sound bitter and amazed. You're brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Turn my greatest vulnerability into the weapon that ends this. Is it crazy? Completely. He pulled her close, careful of her belly. But it might actually work. Dominic's always needed to feel superior. If I hand him victory by choosing you over the Empire, his revenge loses its point. Why destroy a man who's already destroyed himself? They spent the next 3 days setting it up. Marco reached out to neutral parties, brokers who could arrange a meeting between Victor and Dominic without it turning into immediate bloodshed. The location was chosen carefully, a restaurant in Little Italy, owned by a family with ties to both men, public enough to discourage violence but private enough for honest conversation. Claire insisted on being there, and despite Victor's initial refusal, she eventually made him understand. This only worked if Dominic saw that Victor was choosing her, that the pregnancy had fundamentally changed his priorities. Her presence was essential to selling the narrative. The night of the meeting, Claire dressed carefully in a flowing dress that accentuated her pregnancy rather than hiding it. She was 6 months along now, unmistakably carrying Victor's child, and she needed Dominic to see exactly what Victor was choosing over power. The restaurant was closed to regular customers, just the neutral family's security and the principals. Dominic Castellano sat at a corner table, flanked by 2 bodyguards, watching with cold eyes as Victor and Claire entered. He looked exactly as Claire had imagined from Victor's descriptions. Handsome in a cruel way, expensive suit, the kind of man who'd learned to weaponize charm. But his eyes were dead, and she knew immediately that this was someone capable of anything. Victor? Dominic's smile was sharp. And the famous Claire, the woman who made you weak. The woman who made me realize there's more to life than this empire we built on blood. Victor kept his hand on Claire's back as they sat across from Dominic. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I was curious. The great Victor DeLuca, requesting a sit-down after trying to kill half my organization. Dominic's gaze flicked to Claire's belly. Fatherhood has made you sentimental. It's made me reassess my priorities. Victor leaned back, projecting calm control. You wanted revenge for what I did 5 years ago. Wanted to prove you were my equal, maybe my superior. I'm here to give you that. Dominic's eyes narrowed. I'm listening. I'm stepping back, retiring from active operations to focus on my family, the territories I control, the operations, the connections. I'm distributing them among my lieutenants. But the crown, the reputation, the fear that comes with the DeLuca name, Victor paused. That's up for grabs. You want it? It's yours. All you have to do is leave my family alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Dominic stared at Victor like he'd spoken a foreign language. You're serious, Dominic said finally. You'd actually walk away. I already am walking away. The question is whether you accept victory gracefully or force me to salt the earth on my way out. Victor's voice hardened. I'll be honest with you, Dominic. If you push this, if you keep targeting Claire and my child, I won't just fight you. I'll destroy everything. Your allies, your operations, every person who's ever helped you. I'll burn it all down and salt the earth so thoroughly that your name becomes a cautionary tale. You'll get your revenge, but you'll get nothing else. No empire, no respect, just mutual annihilation. Or, Dominic prompted, or you accept that you've won, that you made Victor DeLuca choose family over power, made the legendary crime lord walk away to protect a woman and an unborn child. That's a better story than killing me, isn't it? More proof of your superiority. I couldn't do what you did, put business over everything. You were right 5 years ago. I got soft. And now you get to be king while I change diapers. Claire watched Dominic process this, saw the calculations running behind his eyes. Victor was right about the man's ego. The narrative of making his former partner retreat was more satisfying than simple murder. What about the trafficking? Claire asked quietly. The operation Victor shut down. Does that come back too? Dominic's gaze snapped to her. You think you get to make demands? I think I get to know if my child will grow up in a city where children are safe or where they're commodities. Claire kept her voice steady despite her fear. Victor walked away from you over that issue. I need to know if accepting your victory means accepting that evil too. You've got nerve, I'll give you that. Dominic studied her with something like respect. The trafficking was never about money. It was about power, about having something Victor's morality couldn't touch. If he's walking away, giving me what I want, then I don't need to prove that point anymore. The trafficking stays dead. It wasn't a moral victory, just a practical one, but Claire would take it. Then we have a deal, Victor said. I announce my retirement within the week. Transition takes 3 months, after which the DeLuca Empire is history, and you're the undisputed power in New York. In exchange, Claire and our child are permanently off limits. Any harm comes to them, even accidentally, and the deal is void. Dominic considered for a long moment. Then he smiled, and it was genuinely pleased. Done. I want it in writing, witnessed by the commission, but yes, done. He raised his wine glass. To Victor DeLuca's retirement and my ascension. May you enjoy domestic bliss while I enjoy everything you built. They drank to the devil's bargain, and Claire felt the tension that had been strangling her for months finally ease. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was survival. The next 3 months were strange and bittersweet. Victor systematically dismantled his empire, distributing territories to loyal lieutenants with strict instructions to honor the agreement with Dominic. Some of his people were angry, feeling betrayed by his choice to walk away. Others understood and respected the decision. Marco was among those who understood. You're doing the right thing, he told Victor as they oversaw the final transfer of operations. This life, it takes everything from you eventually. Better to walk away on your own terms than have it all taken. What will you do? Victor asked. You've been with me from the beginning. I've got enough saved to disappear somewhere warm. Maybe find a nice woman who doesn't ask too many questions. Marco smiled. I'm too old for this game anyway. Time for both of us to retire. Claire's pregnancy progressed smoothly through the transition. The attack stopped completely once Dominic's victory became public knowledge. There was no point targeting Victor's family when Victor was already defeated, already choosing domesticity over power. She gave birth on a sunny spring morning, 3 weeks after Victor's complete withdrawal from operations became official. Their daughter came into the world healthy and perfect, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined expression. They named her Sophia, after Victor's mother, and watching Victor hold their tiny daughter for the first time, Claire knew they'd made the right choice. This man, dangerous, complicated, reformed, was meant to be a father, was meant for this peaceful life they'd bought with his empire. The penthouse became a home instead of a fortress. Victor still had security, still maintained enough connections to ensure their safety, but the daily violence ceased. He started a legitimate security consulting firm, using his expertise to help protect others without the criminal enterprise. Claire returned to emergency medicine part-time, balancing her career with motherhood. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was theirs, and it was good. On Sophia's first birthday, they held a small celebration in the penthouse. Just Marco, who'd returned from retirement to be godfather, and a few trusted friends. Claire stood on the terrace watching Victor teach their daughter to blow out her birthday candle and felt a contentment she'd never thought possible. "Any regrets?" Marco asked, appearing beside her with champagne. "Not a single one," Claire smiled. "You?" "Just that I didn't get to shoot Dominic when I had the chance." But he was grinning. Though watching him fail to fill Victor's shoes has been its own entertainment, turns out being king is harder than it looks. Claire had heard the same. Dominic was struggling to maintain the empire Victor had built, his reputation suffering as operations fell apart without Victor's strategic brilliance. But that was no longer their problem. Victor joined them on the terrace, Sophia balanced on his hip, cake frosting smeared across her chubby cheeks. "She's got your stubbornness," he told Claire. "Refused to let me help with the candle." "Good. She'll need it in this world." Claire reached up to wipe frosting from Sophia's nose, earning a giggling squirm. "Strong women run in the family." "Strong everything runs in this family." Victor shifted Sophia to one arm so he could wrap the other around Claire's waist. "I was thinking, with how well the security firm is doing, maybe we could start a foundation. Fund medical clinics in underserved areas, scholarship programs for aspiring doctors. Use some of the money I made in that old life to do actual good." "I think that's a perfect idea." Claire leaned into him, watching their daughter examine her sticky fingers with intense concentration. Sophia could grow up seeing that her parents build things instead of destroying them. "Our daughter is going to grow up knowing she was loved enough that her father walked away from an empire to keep her safe." Victor pressed a kiss to the top of Claire's head. "That's the legacy I want. Not fear, not power, just love, and the family we built from impossible circumstances." Later that night, after Sophia was asleep in her nursery and the guests had departed, Claire found Victor in his office. He was looking at an old photograph, him and Dominic from years ago, young and arrogant and certain they'd rule the world forever. "You miss it?" she asked softly. "Sometimes. The certainty, the power, the clarity of knowing who I was." Victor set the photo down. "But then I look at you and Sophia, and I remember what I have now is infinitely better. I was powerful before. Now I'm happy. There's a difference." Claire moved behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. "Do you ever wonder if Dominic will honor the agreement? If we'll ever really be safe?" "Every day. But I also know that as long as I stay out of his way, as long as I'm not a threat, he has no reason to break the peace. His ego is satisfied. We're no longer worth his attention." Victor turned in her embrace, pulling her into his lap. "And if he does come for us, I still have resources, still have loyalty. I may have left that world, but I'm not defenseless." "Good." Claire kissed him, slow and deep. "Because I didn't save your life just to lose you now." "You didn't just save my life, Claire. You gave me a reason to live it." Victor's hands cradled her face with infinite tenderness. "Everything I am now, everything good in me, that's because of you. Because you saw something worth saving in a man who was drowning in his own blood and made the impossible choice to try." "Best impossible choice I ever made." She smiled against his lips. "Though I have to admit, when those men dragged you into my diner, I never imagined it would end like this. With you as my wife, the mother of my child, the love of my life?" Victor laughed quietly. "Neither did I. I thought that night was the end. Instead, it was the beginning of everything that matters." They sat together in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in blood and chaos and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Outside the windows, New York continued its eternal dance of light and shadow, but they were no longer part of its dangerous rhythm. They'd found their own rhythm instead, softer, safer, infinitely more precious. Claire thought about the path that had brought them here, from a failing medical career to a blood-stained diner floor to this moment of perfect domestic peace. Every choice, every risk, every terrifying leap of faith had led to this family, this love, this life. She'd given up her dreams of being a surgeon and found a different calling. She'd saved a dying crime lord and discovered her own strength. She'd married danger and transformed it into devotion. And through it all, she'd never stopped being herself. The woman who acted instead of freezing, who made impossible decisions under pressure, who chose courage over fear. "I love you," she whispered into the quiet. I love you too. Victor's arms tightened around her. Forever, Claire. For every moment we have left. Forever turned out to be longer than either of them dared hope. The years passed in a cascade of ordinary moments that became extraordinary through their mere existence. Sophia grew into a brilliant, fierce girl who inherited her mother's compassion and her father's strategic mind. She knew her father's past. They were honest with her as she grew old enough to understand, but she also knew the man he'd become. The father who coached her soccer team, who helped with her science projects, who taught her that strength meant protecting the vulnerable rather than exploiting them. Victor's security firm flourished, and the foundation they established funded dozens of medical clinics across the country. Claire ran the medical side while continuing her emergency medicine work, and together they built something that mattered, something clean. Dominic Castellano's empire eventually collapsed under the weight of his own cruelty and incompetence, and a new generation of criminals rose to take his place. But they all remembered the legend of Victor De Luca, the man who'd walked away from power for love. Some called it weakness. Others, particularly those who'd survived long enough to see the end of their own stories, called it wisdom. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Victor surprised Claire with a trip back to the diner where they'd first met. It had changed ownership several times since Victor sold it, and the new owners had no idea of its significance. They sat in the booth where Victor had nearly died, and Claire found herself crying. "What's wrong?" Victor asked, concerned. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right." She wiped her eyes. "I'm just remembering that night, how terrified I was, how certain I was that I was making a terrible mistake by helping you." "Were you? Making a mistake?" Claire looked at her husband, older now, gray threading through his dark hair, laugh lines around his eyes from years of genuine happiness. She thought about Sophia waiting at home with Marco, probably convincing her godfather to let her stay up past bedtime. She thought about the clinic they'd opened last month in the Bronx, serving the same struggling neighborhood where she used to live. She thought about the life they'd built from one desperate act of mercy on a rain-soaked November night. "No," she said. "It was the best decision I ever made. Saving you saved me too." Victor took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "You know what I think about sometimes? All the little choices that had to happen exactly right for us to find each other. If I'd been shot an hour earlier or later, if you'd quit the diner the week before, if Marco had chosen a different hospital to avoid. Any one thing different, and we never meet." "Fate," Claire said, "or luck, or grace, whatever you want to call the force that brought us together." Victor smiled. "I used to think my life was about power and control. Turned out it was about finding you. Everything else was just the path that led me to that diner floor." They left eventually, walking out into the New York night hand in hand. The city had changed and stayed the same, just like them. They'd been transformed by love and parenthood and the choice to leave violence behind, but the core of who they were remained. Claire Monroe had walked away from medicine to escape a broken system, then found her way back through a man who needed saving. Victor De Luca had built an empire on fear and blood, then dismantled it for love. Together, they'd created something neither could have achieved alone. A family, a legacy, a story of redemption that proved even the darkest lives could find light. That night, tucked into bed beside her husband with their daughter asleep down the hall, Claire thought about the young woman she'd been 10 years ago. Broke, disillusioned, serving coffee to insomniacs and wondering if her life would ever mean anything. If she could go back and tell that woman what was coming, the terror and the danger and the impossible choices, would she do it differently? Never. Because that night in the diner, when armed men had crashed through her door carrying a dying stranger, Claire Monroe had made a choice that changed 2 lives forever. She'd reached for a scalpel instead of a phone. She'd chosen to save instead of run. She'd looked at Victor De Luca's dying eyes and seen not a monster, but a man worth fighting for. One reckless act of mercy. One desperate decision. One woman with the courage to try the impossible. And from that single moment of grace, they'd built everything that mattered. A love that survived impossible odds. A family that flourished in the wreckage of an empire. A future neither of them had dared dream possible. Claire closed her eyes and felt Victor's steady breathing beside her, his arm draped protectively across her waist, even in sleep. This was their happy ending, earned through sacrifice and courage and the willingness to choose each other above all else. The story that had started in blood and rain had transformed into something beautiful. And as Claire drifted towards sleep, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd make the same impossible choice again and again, in every lifetime, in every version of their story. Because some people were worth saving, and some love was worth any risk. Victor DeLuca had been dying when she found him, but in saving his life, Claire had discovered her own. And together, they'd built something that would outlast empires and legends and the dangerous world that had tried to destroy them. They'd built forever.